Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm going to be introducing to you another paper that's a year older than the previous one, written in December 2018, and reminded me that I should have put in the left a date on the previous paper as well, which was December 2019. I would like to think that my writing skills uh, progressively gets better over the years, but I just want you to consider some of the ideas presented in this paper, and which will basically be um, comparing the ideas of Descartes and Plato. Right, Descartes came up with the idea of dualism, the separation of mind and body, and etc. etc. And Plato came up with the allegory of the caves, and once you escape this cave, there's supposed to be the true world, right? And this is like his analogy. All right, so and these are the two guys that that was inspired by to write this paper. All right, here I go. Seeking the connection between Descartes' dualism and Plato's theory of forms. If philosophy's purpose is to feed curiosity, then its offering shall be savored, as we have embarked on a task for specifically that purpose, to offer as a platter to be presented in front of the throne, Canarian, to be served for the regal monarch, Reason. The tenor of this paper will be to present a case for the existence of things beyond the material, and whether this be termed dualism, pantheism, or panentheism is less important. These terms may be for the most part arbitrary. As we are to grasp the concept, taxonomy can follow suit. The arguments presented will be heavily weighed in the assumption that there is something more than merely our material existence, but that is simply for the purpose of being able to carry a motive through the course of this thought experiment. So let's for a moment make the abstract our aim, and perhaps its reward will be some sap to gratify the mind. In that pursuit, we will explore the ideas of first Rene Descartes, who first initiated the mind-body debate, and then on to Plato, the mentor of Aristotle, who had a significant bit to offer when it comes to the mind and its ruminations. And lastly, we will try to converge and unite the ideas of these philosophers onto a nexus, and hopefully with that intent we are able to make a preliminary step in the progression towards insightful apprehension. Rene Descartes, the father of modern philosophy and one of the catalyst figures in Europe's transition from the Middle Ages to the contemporary era, he has been a pioneer in his utilization of the method of doubt, and derived from this the substance dualism, which is basically the dichotomy of the material and the immaterial, and also solipsism, the extreme view that one is the only thinking thing, which will be defined shortly, or that is all there is to existence or reality. Both would be adequately be supplemented with Descartes' conception of the evil genius, the evil entity that is there in the sole purpose to deceive its subject. This may be somewhat this may somewhat be a similar concept to the entity known as Demiurge in Gnostic mysticism. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but the understanding is that everything or almost everything falls under the power of the cunning evil genius, humans too, other than the first person observant himself, because in the solipsistic view they may simply be automatons, or David Chalmers' term of philosophical zombies is also hither germane, where essentially these figures make the right reactions in all the right moments, but they are not thinking things, which is here defined by Descartes himself. A thing which thinks, what is a thing which thinks? It is a thing which doubts, understands, conceives, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, which also imagines and feels. But none of this is a conviction or an assertion for an individual considerate for solipsistic or dualistic ideas. This is simply a thought experiment, even as Descartes makes clear himself, And nobody's out here trying to defend it tooth and nail like we often see with religionists. On that note, we shall resume on to elaborate, the mind's indivisibility being its distinguishing factor from the body is just one proposal among many. Some may say that there are only minds and the way idealism espouses, or physical matter is all there is to existence, as believed in materialism or monism. Dualism in this case shares a bit of both, meaning that it believes in the existence of both the material and the immaterial. All these different perspectives are offered as we all try to figure out the enigma that is this life, to perhaps satisfy the questions that occupy our mind when we bother to take a moment's thought. Descartes suggests that reason ought to be utilized in the pursuit of purpose, while making his own case in the defense of God. And this is an approach that sharply differs from those that simply settle by saying that unquestioned faith is a virtue. Descartes instead is willing to face his doubts head on. It shall stand and weather through all examination, perhaps in the Socratic understanding of the sense, if one takes it to be truly real. The types of questions Descartes ponders about is provided by the following thought. If a skilled craftsman makes better artifacts than a less skilled craftsman, then would that not make the artifacts of the master craftsman impeccable? Seeing all the examples of inconsistency, injustice, inequality, and violence in the world, this question would definitely pose the religionist some headache. As a preamble to what follows, let's detail what dualism may also entail, and it is that the soul may actually outlive the body. It is immortal, and philosopher Pythagoras even goes on to suggest that the body actually imprisons the soul. If I could suggest one of my own ideas here, imagine the embryonic form of a human, and compared to other mammals, or reptiles and fish, you notice there does not seem to be much difference. They then slowly start to take their own forms once they become fetuses, but yet, still, if you were to look at a newborn child, they pretty much look the same. That is, if they are of the same race, of course. Here's where we insert a dualistic idea. Perhaps it's the case that a soul is not present in that of a newborn, or that if it is, it might be quite small in proportion to the composition that makes up an individual. If you could further envisage, think of a program you intend to download onto your computer. A little longer than a decade ago, that process used to take a lot more than just a couple of minutes. And so imagine the soul like a program being loaded onto a computer, which then is the body, and thereby the process goes on continuously throughout one's life as the person gains personality, character, just if we were to think of a software. One that has 80% of it loaded has much more content than one that has less than, say, 50% completed. So then, as the person starts to come near the last few years of their life, the soul may eventually get the better of its cage and finally manage to escape, while the body meets its demise. Now, of course, how dare I make my own suggestion amongst these philosophical greats? One may see this as a sign of chutzpah from my part, but for dualists, knowledge does not only come from seeing, reading, and hearing, that is, the utilization of the sense organs, but it can also come from within, that is, introspection. As we boil and make a stew out of the former, and in order to form more new, full, and different ideas, or what economists may call a secondary product. Next, let's look at another philosopher, but from an earlier time. He was originally known as Aristocles, and later in his life came to be known as Plato. He especially has a lot to offer for the dualistic perspective. He believed that there are objects in the sensible world and also the other intelligible realm, similarly to Descartes. So according to Plato, these ideas which we express and understand in this world actually have their pure forms in the intelligible realm. So imagine the sometimes vague terms we use like beauty, health, equality, and though yes they are familiar and comprehensible to us, but their perfect forms reside in the lofty echelons of divinity, if you will. Their manifestations in this world are thus imperfect, meaning that they reflect their ideal form with only a modicum of that ideal being contained within it, but also consisting much of that of its opposite. Ergo, they are a composite rather than its true form. In order to get a better idea, let's deviate from reference and think of the terms mentioned earlier. We can all understand what they mean, but they are packaged with these arbitrary phonetic sounds which has eventually been entrenched within us as second nature. But let's say if one had grown up alone in the wilderness, and now just because they are not able to utilize a language to communicate, but does that mean that they could not imagine these ideas? Another interesting thing relevant to this you may find with multilingual speakers, who could tell you that some words in a particular language of theirs better captures that idea in its expression. I will give some examples for me. I will give some examples. For me personally, the word friend is best captured in Uzbek, which is pronounced dost, while the English word liberty and in Russian svoboda are both preferable over the Uzbek equivalent of irgelik. These are just a few examples, but for some reason, some over others are more powerfully resonating the idea as is conceived in the mind. Within the intelligible realm where all these forms reside, just like we do in society, they do too have a hierarchy, and the good represented by the sun is of the highest order and rank and power, and the Platonic understanding the pursuit of man should be to strive towards this good, that is his ontological goal, meaning that knowledge and wisdom is what thou shalt desire. In order to further elaborate, we have to evoke more of Platonic philosophy, and we intend to do that by mentioning his suggestion of the tripartite state of the soul, which describes the soul being of three elements: reason, spirit, and appetite. In order to describe the virtuous man most worthy of the trajectory towards the good is done by two metaphors. First, he is the soul in which reason of wisdom reigns as his charioteer. Then the other two elements, spirit and appetite, are described as his two steeds, the former reign by courage and the latter by temperance. The second metaphor is mentioned in the Republic, when Socrates was discussing such matter with Glaucon. If one is to imagine the human form like a shell, similarly to the Matryoshka nesting doll, and there the form of the human being, the outermost shell representing reason, the one inside it, is in the form of a lion, representing courage, and the last one being a multifarious beast, representing appetite. The last two are rebellious and power-hungry, to be seated at the helm of the body, and the human or reason in this case ought to take control of his herd like Socrates describes, by domesticating the beast while making the lion his ally, just like the shepherd would do with the sheep and dog. But the misorder in the state of the soul is more common than not, as it takes incredible determination for one to budge from his seat, as to say utilizing another Platonic metaphor, in which the souls are described as prisoners in a cave, who have been seated against a wall, and which shadows of objects pass by and which they take to be real, albeit these objects that are projected onto the wall are actually twice removed from the true ones. That is, a true object is represented by a puppet which is cast onto the wall with its enlarged shadows. So the perceptions the prisoners draw from these shadows are like when one tries to see objects in the dark, Plato describes, which would be made much clearer and distinct once illuminated. But it's no simple transition to go from darkness to light in a rapid instant, and even physically, we would find that would hurt our eyes. But it is also the case when one makes the commitment to see these objects for what they truly are. He must exert incredible effort to climb out of the cave in which he was for life imprisoned, but it would be with much toil and trouble. In the Republic, Socrates says to imagine if this journey was to be imposed on one of the prisoners by force, by yanking him from where he is seated and dragging him violently up the steep, rugged cliff and out the cave, and thence he would be blinded by the amount of life to the amount of light to which he is exposed. Definitely an incredibly tough journey, but hopefully greatly rewarding in the end. We stated earlier that many dualists agree on the immortality of the soul, but in order to now perhaps traverse in the tract of mythology, let's retell of what the idea of metempsychosis entails as explained by So basically, once the waiting period, or the bardo, nears its extent, it is again time for men to be thrown down to the grind, but they at least have a choice, as many options are presented their way. The hasty end up picking impulsively of the lives hidden in a facade. The wise instead choose to deliberate on their options more critically. One example, the epic hero Agamemnon chooses the life of an eagle. Once they have made their pick, the souls then drink from the river of Lethe, which results in their memories being wiped clear, turning them into the state of what some may call tabula rasa. So when dualists suggest the idea that souls bring in with them knowledge they have previously known, to supplement this, does Plato bring up yet another interesting idea? Basically, that learning is recollecting the knowledge we have lost, as to make concise, mathesis is anamnesis, or learning is recollection. The proof that corroborates that the soul ingresses the body with at least an iota of knowledge, Plato argues, is apparent by the case of how we are aware of such terms that are quite abstract and never truly manifest in the perceptible realm. Hence they could not be learned by sensory experience. Plato gives the example of equality. Since never present in the material world in a way that is fully consistent with the idea with which it's backed up, ergo we must have learnt it in a manner beyond our sensory organs, possibly meaning that we may have had direct interaction with these ideas in the intelligible realm. So if we are to build on the idea that everyone has a soul, thus everyone has the ability not only to grasp but to improve and appreciate in the apprehension of these ideas. That is, if they intend to utilize their intellect as they try to realize these noetic and eternal ideas, which it requires one to live in the virtuous life and the search for knowledge and wisdom, and with persistence they can redirect the flow of their streams, to use yet another Platonic metaphor. It is though by no means a leisurely journey, but one's continual effort will eventually pay its dividends, as it is beautifully stated in the Republic. A real lover of learning naturally strives for what is. He does not linger over each of the many things that are believed to be, but keeps on going, without losing or lessening his passion, until he grasps what the nature of each thing itself is, but the element in his soul that is fitted to grasp a thing of that sort because of its kinship with it. Once he has drawn near to it, has intercourse with what really is, and has begotten understanding and truth, he knows, truly lives, is nourished, and at that point, but not before, is relieved from his labor pains. It's one of my favorite quotes. That shall do for this meal, as we sampled with quite diverse ideas with the intention to better understand forms, their manifestations, and perhaps also be assisted in directing some of the pieces of the puzzle that life presents us with. There is though no zealous devotion to any of these ideas, but if the reader is to be driven to continue cogitating on such matter, along with some of the ideas presented here, then perhaps this paper did have something to offer. A potential objection amongst many to Plato's theory of forms is what is known as the sophistic paradox, which basically says that if learning is all about regaining knowledge of what you already previously knew, then what is the point of learning? Let's try to give a sense of an answer that in that regard is by referring to the Kabbalistic idea of tikkun olam, which basically makes the case that the divine chain of command has collapsed, and mankind holds some kind of an obligation in helping repair it. In that case, perhaps the transmission of ideas from the intelligible realm to the sensible realm is in some way fractured or been rendered dysfunctional, and maybe that there's a certain state to where they could potentially be restored. In its own sense, arranging these things in a way that is adjacent to one another helps set its context and content, no matter how bizarre, but at least worth a moment's thought. And if these ideas are given that consideration, then perhaps there will be something to be gained. But this by no means is a tie of a knot to any philosophical inquiry, but rather its opposite, the suggestion of direction, as we shall all intend to contribute in figuring out the enigma that is our world. Alright, so that is my paper. Now I continue here. So, what's there to be taken away from that paper? That's the question we should be left with, you know. Now, of course, for the people who won't even entertain the idea of a soul or, the dualistic presence of a human being, it may be difficult to even consider these ideas, But for others, it's intriguing. It's intriguing. It was certainly intriguing for me. And, I mean, both the works of Descartes and Plato, and it's ultimately trying to direct you to some sort of knowledge or perception, not only of divinity, but of, of your possible membership of that you have in divinity. You know, like think about it this way: how we all have particular amount of money in our bank accounts, right? So we all have a share of the economy. We're all members of the economy, right? I'm here a member in the Canadian economy. I'm here a member in the international economy. But how about if we have membership in that way, um, in divinity? How about if divinity is not something concentrated in a single spot or a single book or establishment, or how about if it's just you know uh, how about if it had just permeated matter? How about if if it's present in individuals in some way, if it's present in nature in some way? How about if everything that's being presented, if everything that's manifest is basically a facet of divinity? You know why? Why does I mean, now this is going on to describe sort of my conception of God. So this is probably gonna be a subject for another video, but it's different. It's different. I nearly became an atheist, and but I came across a newfound belief in God, and it led me somewhere else. But to say I believe in God is a different conception of God. You know, it's a God more closer to the idea of pantheism or panentheism, I should say, right? So that's a video for another time. But another thing this paper presents you with is sustenance. Sustenance, that is to say, intelligible, intellectual, or even spiritual sustenance. Food for thought. Perhaps we could take that in a literal way, right?
I mean, we seem to always think about feeding ourselves physically, right? Because we can feel it in our stomach, right? We can start to feel that we're getting hungry. But don't you think your mind also desires something as well? And if you neglect it for a while, that ability to intellectualize, which may have been born with you, which you may have had inherently, is deteriorating due to neglect, due to you know infrequency of use. I mean, that's something to consider. But all right, anyways, I hope you guys enjoy that. And peace. Stick around. Like, share, subscribe.